And good morning, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. Great to have you here this morning. Alex is out of town, so I'm here. And we're going to welcome you in and say, if you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour, a general discussion of production and IT-related topics where we answer audience-submitted questions. The second hour, typically a bit of a deeper dive into a topic. And today is Audio Wednesday. So our second hour will be, if you so choose, a focus on audio questions. I say if you so choose because the show is always driven by the questions that are submitted on Makana to the show. And we spend the whole day diving into those questions to answer them. And we're going to do that right now. Ken, what do we got today?
Good day, Bill. Well, the first question comes from Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo says, does anyone have favorite sources, layouts, or tips for creating good one-page cheat sheets? Primarily thinking about programming languages like Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, Markdown, and such, but possibly even for Excel, Google Docs, and Zoom.
Boy, that's a lot of ground to cover there in terms of text-based processing. A lot of people use just the standard word processors. I find when I'm trying to figure out cheat sheets, tend to use a program called Omni Outliner, just because it's an outlining program to organize thoughts. And its strength is that you can do nested subgroups of topics. And I often find when I'm trying to figure out little bits of information and reorder them easily, that works for me. Not saying that's the best one. That's just what I've done over the course of time. John Preto has some thoughts, and so does Jeff Cohen. Let's start with Jeff and then go to John. Jeff?
So I use VS Code for any coding, and with all the plugins that VS Code has now in their ecosystem, you can pop up all the cheat sheets and libraries and help information you need right out of VS Code. It's fantastic.
There you go. Jeff Cohen.
And one tip I love and that I use for easy retrieval for things that you use a lot, one of the many things I'm doing, at least if you're on a Mac, with shortcuts, and of course you can automate the same on Windows or Unix, but I just create a keyboard shortcut to whatever that document is. So whatever you're using for the document, I have some for things that are in Google Docs, some on the Mac for things that are in Apple Notes, and then that keyboard shortcut just quickly opens that doc, and there it is, and then escape or whatever to get out of it. So that's super handy.
Yeah, I forgot that you were talking about specifically programming, and that is such a structured language that I would imagine that a program structured specifically for doing that would be much better than a general purpose tool. So hopefully that gave you some ideas. Let's dip into the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida asks, what steps have you taken with a vendor to promote feature development?
And we're going to start with Mitchell.
I have to ask, did he mean future development, or is it
feature development as in feature film? That's a good question.
Feature, wow.
Well, no, I don't know. That's what feature is the word there, but that doesn't mean future development wouldn't be closer. And since we don't have the benefit of Andy being here today, we'll give it a shot. Whichever wouldn't you'd like to take a shot at, Mitchell? You want to continue or leave it to Nigel?
I'd say crisp $1 bill would fix any of those problems.
maybe not. Nigel, what do you think?
So I was going to take the feature as my option here. So how do you get a vendor to add a feature to their product that you want? And I think that there are a number of things, and I probably am more used to this from the vendor side than I am the technician side. Number one, be the person that they go to for information, advice, alphas, betas, tests. Be a useful resource to them is the first thing. Not enough people view this as a two-way relationship. They view it very much as from vendor to user. And when you can give back the other way, it's worth a lot. The second thing is you've got to show a business case. They're going to do a feature if there's a business case for it, if there's a financial opportunity. So show them how it will get used and where else in the market it might be useful.
That's all very good advice. I have a friend who actually works in a large software company, and his job is to overview the requests that come in from the users. It's a very popular piece of software. So there are legions of suggestions and things like that. In terms of, and I'm going to start with a little just bit of what he's told me about bug reports. You know, they do track metrics on them. So your a singular request from one person about one thing that's bothering them tends to get less weight than a lot of people are talking about this right now, and it seems to be a big issue among our user community. So let's give that more priority. It's all about priorities, and I think that from what I've heard talking to him, the more clearly you can articulate why you think a feature is important, not just to you in your specific use case, but why it might be generically good for the whole universe of people using the software. The better you can explain that, the more likely you are to have your feature request taken seriously. There's just so much complexity in these software programs now that if it's I like to do it this way when I have these 14 things happening at the same time. Well, not many people will have those 14 things happening. And so your feature may not get as plugged. Those are my thoughts on it from talking to somebody who does this as a living day in and day out. But that's enough of that. Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas says, is there any hope for seeing a resupply and return to normal pricing for the Raspberry Pi? What's the best substitute for the Raspberry?
Start with Jeff Cohen here. Jeff?
Yeah, it'll return to normal as in what it is now, and everything else on the planet is now normal. I don't remember a history of a lot of companies once they raise prices, just going ahead and reducing all their prices magically. Unfortunately, a lot of companies had some legitimate reasons to have to raise prices to cover true costs of supply and logistics and things like that. And of course, every other company on the planet just took this as a great opportunity to also raise their prices while no one would pay attention. So no, prices for anything are not going to go back to the way they were.
Yeah, it's always seemed to me that price increases is a locking ratchet. Once it clicks over to the next step, it very seldom goes back down again. Next, Mitchell.
I just want to say, Jeff is spot on. I think people that tend to change the prices. I used to pay 35 cents for a gallon of gas, and I don't think those days are going to return anytime soon. Last I checked, a Raspberry Pi 4 was about $350 loaded.
I think my first gallon of gas was 29 cents. Those days are gone. Nigel?
I was only going to talk about generically about the supply chain, and the supply chain is starting to loosen up a bit. So it's coming out in chunks. Things are getting better. Ironically, I suspect in 6 months we will be in an oversupply place because people have got too much stuff, and you may start seeing sales, particularly if the economy starts to struggle, but it's starting to get better.
There you go. So there's some various opinions. I can tell already that we had a modest group of questions to begin with, and so it'd be an excellent day if you have questions. If not, we will get to the end of the list of today, and we will switch on to the second hour for audio questions specifically. You can enter either kind. If you want to ask things about our second hour audio discussion, great. If you want to do general questions, that is great too. When we run out of questions, though, we will say thank you and take off for today. So up to you how long we go. Let's move on to the next question.
Speaking of Bo Cordell from South Carolina, he asks, a week or so ago, I asked the panel about the usefulness of a small, cheap touchscreen monitor. At least one person here bought and tested one. What's the verdict?
I don't know if that person is here. Does anybody remember the discussion and who it might have been that said something about a cheap? Something tells me it might have been Courtney. Was Courtney looking at something like that? I'm just trying to remember back. Mitch, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, we was talking about a 7-inch touchscreen, and I think we suggested an Atomos or a Blackmagic design.
Yeah, I think I remember that part of it. Jesse, you had some other thoughts?
I use the touchscreen that Pi recommends when you buy your Raspberry Pi, and I like it for that. I can't speak on using Atomos with a computer or something like that, but this works for Raspberry Pi.
Was that a generic off of Amazon or someplace similar, or was it a branded name that we could give out to Bo to help him find something?
Oh, I could read off the numbers written on it, but it's the one that Raspberry Pi suggests. I don't know if it's directly on their website, but it's kind of like the built for their Pi monitor.
Nice. That's an interesting device. What are you using that for? That looks really cool.
Absolutely nothing right now. I wanted to get into Pis, and hey, for the person who's looking for a cheap Pi, if you're in desperate need, just give me a call.
It's a very impressive looking build there with all of those components sticking out of the back of it. I wouldn't fly with that, but other than that, it looks really cool. Nicely done. Let's move on to the next question.
I like Pi. Douglas Carmichael says, in this Seattle Kraken Stadium introduction, and he gives us a web link here, they're projecting video onto the ice surface. How would they be doing that? And what tools would you use to precisely map the video to a specific shape?
So the projection industry, and they're doing this more and more. We're seeing it on the sides of buildings. We're seeing it video properly mapped to irregular objects, which I find fascinating. It means that they have to make the actual graphic kind of three-dimensional such that when it's projected on a plane, many, many yards in front of another plane, everything fits and one isn't much smaller than the other. This is a deal. The first time I actually saw this, and one of the things that really surprised me about it was at an NBA All-Star game that I got lucky enough to grab a ticket to. And as I walked down the concourse, I noticed these very vague patterns, little gobos that were swirling along the floor as I walked. And I didn't pay much attention to them. But when I got back and watched a replay, they took a camera through there, and those things that I could barely see really popped on camera. So one of the things that surprised me is that how things look on video in terms of the contrast and their readability and what happens in the real world are very different. So if you ever go to a hockey game and you see some very vague looking things projected on that by a projector or something out, maybe, during pre-show, that doesn't mean they're that vague to the audience. I was really surprised about that. Mitch, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's an extension of exactly what you're talking about. Mapping projection is a big business now. If you walk down Times Square now, they're doing that a lot on sides of buildings. They even have it to the point where they have it, if there's an irregularly shaped building, that the only part of the screen is mapped to that particular part of the building, and then something might step out like a dragon or something like that and scare the heck out of people.
Yeah, that industry is going through a tremendous amount of R&D, and it is another form of advertising, marketing to be able to do that. It always, for a while it was building wraps where they literally had to go up like putting up a billboard and stretch out and append a fabric to a building. Now, unless the building is huge and it would cost way too much to project something bright enough to make it readable, they can do a lot of that stuff with buildings. And boy, when a museum or something like that does projection, it can really look beautiful. The designers are paying good attention to this, and I think it's a growing field. I think if I was a young artist and I knew how to do anything close to that, I would explore that because it's a fascinating thing to be able to project onto an irregular canvas like that. All right, I'm just mumbling here. Let's go on to the next question.
Bo Cordell, Charleston, South Carolina. Any home labbers here? Working on my home network's Docker stack, currently running Pi-hole, Unify Controller, WireGuard VPN, and a few other miscellaneous apps. Any other favorites among the panel?
Bo, I'm not sure you have anybody here who plays in that playground. Nobody has clicked in on that. So this may be one of those great questions where save it, don't lose it, but try a different panel group another day. Serge has a thought. He just popped in. Serge?
Well, it's just the part that mentioned Docker that referred me to answer the question, because I'm not big on using Docker in my home lab. My home lab is all about VMs and all about server, and not really server, but Hyper-V that I can use as a server with Hyper-V and set up VMs of Linux or Windows, anything I need. Docker, for me, it's more when you want something in the cloud and save on the cost, because Docker will cost less than a full VM infrastructure. So maybe you just push me to somewhere and I will need to try to have Docker on my home lab, and something I could answer more properly in the next time.
So do I understand that Docker is kind of a software stack that lives in the cloud that you can have access to, that hosts apps and things like that? Is that what Docker actually is? Because I'm completely unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, in my understanding, it's a way to have a smaller OS part and run a service. It's one of the technology to try to have service separated from the full server OS, because the way you try to reach that security is to have every service has its own Docker. That way it's more manageable and more probably safe.
So a virtual partitioning kind of a scheme. Yeah. Interesting. Well, now I know something I didn't know before, which is part of what we try to do here on Office Hours every day. And part of the reason I think people tune in here. One of the reasons I find the shows that I know nothing about in advance, some of the most interesting that I see here. Let's move on to the next question.
John Johnson from New York asks, I have a client who does 2 live streams to YouTube every year. They record and edit it, and we simply play out the edited clip live to YouTube from my system. Instead of this, is there a way to schedule a play out on YouTube or some other software? Thanks.
Oh, and I'm really sorry that Alex isn't here today because this seems like the kind of thing that he's very familiar with, but operating essentially YouTube as a distribution system. I don't do that myself, so I don't know, and I don't see it. Oh, Jeff Cohen. Jeff Cohen has some thoughts. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like it's exactly what he's looking for, but in case you're not aware, there is the YouTube premieres that you can schedule. So you can upload the video to YouTube and schedule a premiere. It's a great way to build some interest and build some hype. And it is a live viewing event because whatever time you schedule that premiere for, that's when it becomes available, and then it's live and you have some of the live functionality. So that's the closest I can think of, at least.
Jesse.
If you're doing that, just be sure to be aware of YouTube's publishing schedule. So I think you have to upload within like 24 hours or 12 hours of broadcast. So you can't upload it an hour before broadcast if you're doing it as a premiere that you're going to be advertising as kind of like a live streamy premiere.
That sounds like very good advice on both cases. So thank you both. Let's move on to the next question.
Paul Walhus from Austin, Texas says Avatar, The Way of Water arrives in cinemas December 16th, and the trailer was just released. He gives us a web link and asks, will it bring back 3D?
Oh, that's a big question. Let's take a shot at it. We're going to start with Javier.
Well, I think the movie industry has been looking for different ways to get people back into the theaters, and maybe good 3D can do it. Well, that in mind, Avatar is very different for any other, or almost every other 3D movie. The first one was very different because they use like a special rig with special cameras, and it tend to be that most studios just like did 3D as an afterthought. So I'm not sure if he's going to bring good 3D back. That's what I'm hoping, that the technology that Cameron's making advances so much that other filmmakers can do it, and we don't get like more like this fake 3D.
He's been working on it for a long time, and I know they've spent a lot of money on mounting this production. Jesse, your thoughts?
It seems like we see a pop and a fizzle of 3D every 15 or so years in the theater. I believe that if anyone could precipitate a pop, it's James Cameron with Avatar. But I also believe that this time the fizzle will probably be quicker because so many eyeballs have migrated to streaming and 3D just isn't there in the home theater. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Nigel.
So I heard the other day that they believe the box office is going to have to be close to $2 billion if this is going to return any money. So that is a very long stretch. I have to say, this is not the first trailer. It's probably the third I've seen, and I find them completely uninteresting. I think he may have left far too long between this and the previous one. I have to tell you, it doesn't appeal to me. We go to the cinema regularly. We're still people who go to the multi-screen and the big house. This is not on our list.
Interesting. Mitchell.
3D lends itself to CGI because you have a lot more control over it. I saw it first at the Muppets show at Disney World, and it was very impressive. But he might as well leverage all that he has, and since the movie is mostly CGI, they can do well with it. And I think they should bring it out quickly because Avatar: The Way of Water might be subject to water restrictions in California.
You can't put that much on screen? Is that what you're telling me? Metric ton limit. Serge.
3D in the movie theater, it's not a reason for me to go back to the movie theater. And actually, it's a reason not to go because with my glasses, to have 3D glasses in front of them, it's a mess. It's not a good situation. 3D on some VR glasses, might be something I'm be interested of testing. So if that's the way the industry wants to go, I am fine. But movie theater, it's no go for me.
Well, now that's an interesting note you just made, 3D glasses, because we've been hearing forever that Apple is working on some sort of immersive 3D wearables system. So I wonder if
I have a Meta VR glasses, and the 3D effect on them it's nice enough. And I don't have the same problem of wearing glasses in front of my glasses.
Ah, okay. So interesting. I was just wondering if there might be some convergence there of, if they got a piece of fabulous 3D content, and if, and nobody knows, Apple comes out with another product, that might be a convergence. Who knows? Nigel, your thoughts?
Just small name drop. I was having dinner at Jeffrey Katzenberg's house a few years ago, me and 120 other people. So it was quite as special as it sounds. And he had some of, SKG's cartoons playing. I can't remember which one it was, on a TV in his living room. And as you walk past, it was in 3D without glasses. And it was one of those things where you walk past and then you sort of back up and look at it again. So I don't know what the technology was. My guess is it wasn't a generally available technology. It was probably a one-off thing that they use. But that was a very interesting experience, to be able to watch a 3D cartoon without any glasses at all.
Yeah, you think about virtual reality. We all know that there's a lot of shops with a lot of backing working on that. And you can see that dimensionality is a piece that fits into virtual reality, fits into stereoscopic and beyond. And this idea of head-worn displays of some form. There seems to be a lot of things trying to converge on that. And you just wonder whether or not some of these, the resurgence of 3D in films and stuff like that, maybe people are trying to position themselves and or their content for a future where they see that coming. I don't know. I know nothing beyond that. It'll be interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm mentally still distant from it, but it may turn out to be a wow thing that I'll really be interested in later. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael is here to tell us many large venues are using IPTV platforms to distribute video within a facility. And he asks, do you think we'll ever see North American telecoms move away from legacy coax cabling to deliver pure IP-based content delivery to the residential market?
Serge, let's start with you.
I don't know enough about the U.S. market, but I can tell you here in my local area, the traditional cable supplier are all moved to IPTV.
Yeah. Mitchell.
Kind of like two questions, but I'll answer the first one first. Yes, everything's going IP. Audio, video, you name it. If it can be turned into a packet, it's going over an IP network. And the other part is that Verizon just announced that they're tearing out all of their wire-based phone systems. They're switching all the fiber.
Interesting. Jeff Cohen.
Yeah, and the other thing when we're talking about will they ever, I mean, eventually it will all be wireless. When the technology and scale and capacity gets to a reasonable price point, it will be far easier for these companies to maintain, wireless towers than it is to maintain wires running to every single address in the country. So it will eventually mostly be wireless delivery and then therefore IP based.
Peter Sargent.
I think it's just key to remember is don't confuse IPTV, which is a transport protocol, with the physical media that it's going across. So whether it's wireless, fiber, coax is a physical media. It transmits digital signals just as well as fiber or wireless. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, Serge wants to come back in.
And regarding the wireless, I agree with Jeff, that the last mile is going to be wireless more and more. But I think the back end, the infrastructure is still going to be rely on fiber because the reliability and the speed is there. The wireless is always tend to be variable as a speed and reliability.
Yeah, that strikes me as being sensible. Jeff, another thought?
Yeah, and just as an example, I'm in a high-rise building, and we have quote-unquote Google Fiber available to us. But the reality is, it's not hardwired to my building. It's hardwired to some building close to us in our community, and then they hit all the surrounding buildings wirelessly. So our whole building is served wirelessly from some other building that actually has the Google Fiber. It's still really fast, shockingly fast and shockingly resilient. I'm in Miami Beach, shockingly resilient to weather and storms and everything, but this whole building is served wirelessly already.
That's interesting. So you're not actual fiber, you're fiber adjacent with a enabling technology between your building and another building that actually has the drop.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I've noticed cable here, we have old copper into the building, but I'm seeing as more and more channels serve more and more programming, and as my use includes not just all that entertainment media stuff, but also internet stuff and wireless control and Internet of Things stuff and the rest of that, I'm seeing momentary drops back in quality as network bandwidth just gets saturated, and suddenly my TV will drop back to a pixelated mess for a few seconds before it catches up with the data stream and can serve me the picture that it's supposed to be serving me. There's just a lot of data flowing through these systems, and I wonder what the long-range possibility. That was interesting to hear that about your building being just the center of a cluster and them not actually dropping fiber lines to everything, but kind of cheating in that not last mile, but last few hundred feet. Let's move on to the next question.
And Jeff Cohen, our panelist, changes direction a little bit and asks, can the MixPre noise assist be used to post-process an audio file?
Mitchell?
Yes and no. I wish it was more yes than no. It's not a plug-in that you can run in your favorite DAW. However, if you have a mixer that allows inserts, you could insert it live via a MixPre into the system, and then get that luscious noise assist, which we like so much. But that's the only way I know you can get it right now.
Yeah. Jeff Cohen.
And I guess my question more directly is, if I hand a file to someone that has a MixPre, can they run it through Noise Assist?
Well, the only way that I could see doing it is, because it's not a live plugin except in the MixPre, is to do it as an insert in post-production.
Yeah, there are other high-end noise reduction, intelligent noise reduction, which is what this is. This is similar to the Cedar system, I know, that has been around for a long time, and that we've used on location, a lot of noisy locations, to do that kind of magic that we're talking about, which is to capture a print of the background sound that you want to get rid of, and then the algorithm in there reduces that while leaving the voice track, which is how I use it normally, alone. That the algorithms are pretty well understood now, but it depends on the nature of the program or the thing you're buying. Are you buying a plugin? Are you buying a program? Are you buying the capability inside a device? Each of those are going to be a little bit different. Mitch, you had another thought?
Mickey says Studio DNS would be the one to use.
Okay, so Studio DNS.
And this actually stems from I have a show idea brewing. So I'm specifically asking or curious about the MixPre Noise Assist. But so it sounds like that. So I like the yes, no.
Yeah, well, that'll make for a good show. There's nothing like a little let's explore how it really works as opposed to how the marketing materials say that it should work. Good. Excellent. Let's move on to the next question.
Well, Alberto Especi from Santa Cruz, Bolivia, asks, does anyone know where to buy a Sony FX30? Inside the U.S., seems back-ordered most places online.
Mitch?
Yeah, Gilberto, I know I'm not answering your question, but I've been searching frantically here, and I've hit all the usual suspects like B&H and Adorama, and I'm confirming that they are back-ordered most places. I think it's because it's a new release.
Do you want me to go over and knock on the door? I happen to live about 7 blocks from the Sony monster West Coast facility, but I don't think they would let me in or have any idea why is this guy knocking on our door. People are really excited about the camera, so hopefully you'll be able to figure it out and they'll get whatever supply chain issues they're having done as soon as possible. Let's go on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael, we talk about product X or Y being the solution to need Z, but what are some tools for nurturing cohesion within a group and keeping people's interest in a project, even when the project is not going well?
Luckily, we have Nigel here. Nigel, take it away.
I am prompted to remember the old phrase that success has many parents, but failure is an orphan, in terms of what happens when a project starts to go wrong. I think the reality is, if the project is going wrong, you should find out why it's going wrong and make sure if it needs stopping, that it gets stopping. There's an issue we talked about, I think, the other day on Monday, I mentioned called unstoppability, where people are unable to stop projects even though they know they're going wrong. And that's a bad place. I think what's more likely is that as projects go on, and particularly long projects, and some people I know here have been involved in very long projects, what happens is you get drift, either in scope or in objectives or in patience. And so keeping the team focused on what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it, and being willing to come back at regular intervals and restate and adjust as necessary is the best way to keep people focused on what they need to be focused on.
Boy, does everything you just said resonate with me. I've been on projects back when I was working in the corporate world more. And, sometimes the target, you set a perfectly rational target in month 1 of an initiative, but now you're in month 9 and the actual target has moved, the need has moved. And if you just blindly keep driving toward what the original goal was, even if you successfully get there, there will be no use in you being there. So constant assessment, reassessment, and intelligent decision-making as to whether or not the old target is still the correct target to be shooting for. Critical to getting anything done well. Let's go on to the next question.
Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas. What are the best live stream options for the 2022 FIFA World Cup?
Nigel will start us out.
So it obviously depends on where you live, but if you live in a large US city, then you probably, with a very cheap aerial, can pull this off Fox, which is showing most of the games. If you're on Fox Sports 1, which is where the England game was yesterday, that will not work for you. If you are a streamer and you have something like an Apple TV, the chances are your local Fox local Fox affiliate has an app that lives there. We use that, and we normally only get the news for free, and then it goes into paid, but they are showing the football, as we call it in the rest of the world, free without having to have a Fox subscription. Again, if the game is on Fox Sports 1, you're going to have a problem. If you want to start spending money, you then have, YouTube TV or Hulu TV, which effectively gives you a cable subscription. The next step up is obviously to get a cable subscription, and then if you're crazy, you can go and buy yourself a satellite.
It is so complicated out there. I wanted to watch the game yesterday, so I started it up and I thought, okay, it's on Fox, but it was Fox Sports through my cable provider, Spectrum, and it was running through my Apple TV. And so I had started the game, and then for some reason, I don't know why, I had backed up a little bit. So I was watching in the living room. My wife came home and I said, they just did. And she said, well, I heard that 5 minutes ago because I was running 5 minutes behind the regular world because I had so many layers between me and that. And then eventually I went in and I had to do a little bit of work in my studio. So I popped the same game open on my Apple TV and I went, well, that's way farther along than I was on that system or the system before it. Things have gotten so complicated that I'm going to have to put a gigantic signal flow diagram on my wall. What am I tuned to today? I have too many sources of the same things, modern things. I also wanted to note that we're down to just a few questions here in the queue, and we're at about the halfway point in the hour. So we can either switch over and talk about audio things, if anybody has audio things. For those of you who, I don't think I see very many audio only questions. So we've just got one at this point. So if there are no more audio questions, we will be closing off not too long after the top of the hour, which is fine, whatever you want to do. But if you have additional questions, either about our regular topics or about audio topics, please toss them in now, and that'll let us keep going. Or if you're you are the producers. The audience is the producers here. So if you don't have additional ones, we'll just end a little early today. Let's get on to the next question here.
Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas. Have the last 2 or 3 years of Zoom made people awkward in social situations? How do you relearn person-to-person social skills?
That's an interesting question. Jesse's going to start us out.
Absolutely, yes, it has. The good news is it has done the same thing to pretty much everyone we work with, and we are enjoying this 3 to 6 month buffer period as we all get back into the flow of working in person again.
Mitch Hill?
Yeah, Paul, I'm having a problem in social situations. I can't answer anybody's question unless it goes, next question.
We need that button that they used to have for that the Circuit City. The next question. Serge Blondin. Don't listen back in. I didn't mean to say that. Serge?
I don't think it's only Zoom. I think it's the fact that we stay at home so much and we reduce all the social contact that we are now have to relearn being socially beast. For the first year this year, in the last 3 years, I'm going to have a Christmas party with over 20, 30 people. And it's just re-put myself in the managing of it and re-put myself of, I'm going to see that person, and we need to make sure that everything is fine. And it's a relearn process.
Mitch.
Yeah, I noticed that people dress very well from the waist up, but from the waist down, they're wearing shorts at gala affairs where they should be black tie. I don't know what that's about. And don't get me started on virtual backgrounds.
Yeah. I do think this is going to take some time to work out. I because I have a son and he's got friends and I deal with young people more than I probably otherwise would at this point in my life. I've seen a substantial shift and the sons and grandchildren even of people that I know and associate with, they've had a tough time over the last couple of years. A lot of kids who would normally socialize through the school experience have been either on Zoom school or otherwise kind of out of the stream of things. I think it's going to affect a lot of things, and I'm certainly not qualified to explain them all or to understand them all. I can just see kind of intuitively that it's going to be a readjustment for a while. I think work from home is a piece of that. I think virtualization of so many things. We've always, since the dawn of the gaming generation, have had the why is Billy or Susie sitting in their room just playing video games all day long, and I think that's been nothing but exacerbated by this. Those are just my thoughts. Everybody will have their own tear through this, but something society's going to have to deal with. Next question.
All right, here we go. Tom Ferguson from Phoenix, Arizona wants to know, did we snag any Cyber Monday tech deals?
And since Tom has weighed in on this, is there something you want to specifically note, Tom?
Well, mine's kind of boring. I got a replacement keyboard, a foot pedal, and a cheese plate that I can't even eat.
Oh, that's pretty good. I have a new food processor thing coming. That's the only thing that my wife and I decided to do. We replaced our microwave oven a week and a half ago, and now we're going to another countertop appliance that does 14 things. Hopefully well, we'll see.
Do they have plates made from cheese? I don't get that.
Yeah, well, yes, crudité is a huge thing, even if you can't pronounce it. And I can tell you a story about a disaster that I ran into by mispronouncing that horribly when ordering room service in a very fancy hotel. But I will not, because I will be too embarrassed to reveal that part of my life. Anyway, but let's just say the word crudettes was uttered, and that was stupid. Let's move on to the next question.
Your secret is safe with us. Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas asks, on the Mac, how do you move the dock and the menu bar around? Are there shortcuts or add-ons to make this easier?
And we got a lot of people who want to play with this one, so this will be fun. Let's start with Jeff Cohen, then go on to Peter Sargent and more. So Jeff, take it away.
Sorry. Yeah, there are. And, rather than do it manually, because, what is the saying? If you do something more than once, you should script it. So let me just quickly see if I can show you this here. And that should be this. If you just tell me if you can see my computer screen now.
I see code.
Great. So this part right here, and I can drop this in the chat, or you can just screen grab this, but this will programmatically, I'm slowly but surely shifting a lot of things that I've had automated with AppleScript into shortcuts on Mac, also iOS. And it's very limited so far. So, there's some things they have made functions for shortcuts, but you can fill in those gaps with little blocks of AppleScript. And this is an example of one of those things. So right here, this is how you move the dock around, and it's super fast, and it does the trick. And I have, for example, an on-air shortcut that does a whole host of things, loads up all the apps I need, sets things in place, sets the lighting, does everything. And one of the things is I kind of move windows and monitors around, and it's super easy with just one hotkey.
Jeff, you get the award today on the show for the geekiest way to do something. I mean, don't go to the dock and say left, bottom, or right. No, write an AppleScript. And I think this is fabulous. And I want to applaud you for taking us down that pipeline. You can stop your screen share now if you would, and let's go on to Peter Sargent. Peter?
And as they said on Monty Python, and now for something completely different, I was just simply going to point out the simplest way for Paul to do this is go to the settings menu from the Apple on the upper left-hand corner and select desktop and dock, and it has settings to, left, right, bottom, disappear. I mean, so you can do it strictly through the settings, and it is now it's the antithesis of what Jeff just showed us. It is strictly using the Apple UI to do it.
It was so much fun. Jesse Kessler. We've got people who want to weigh in on this. This is fabulous. Jesse.
There's one more way that you can do it, and that is by going down to your dock, and there's a vertical line here that you can right-click on and go to Dock Preferences, and that should get you done.
There you go. Left, bottom, and right are possibilities. Nigel?
The only thing I have to add is you have a huge decision, Paul, to take, and you just saw it demonstrated in the last thing. Are you a permanent docker or a disappear or reappear docker? And you are going to have to decide how you want to live your life. And that's a really important and difficult decision. I just don't jump too quickly. Try it one way, try the other, and then make the decision. But you'll be in one group or the other at the end.
Unless you think this is simple, then you get into the world that I live in, which is multiple monitors. And which monitor do you want the dock to live on most of the time? And as Nigel was just indicating, sometimes I want the dock to be gone, like when I'm editing in Final Cut. I don't need the dock up. So I want the dock to be, pull my mouse cursor to the bottom and the dock will pop up. And it might be of a particular side. It might have revealed, whereas you slide over each program in the dock that's resonant, it grows or shrinks. There's a lot of animation to the dock, and it can be fun, but I'm always rebooting my system and finding the dock on the screen that I didn't want it to be on. So there's a lot of interconnectivity in dock programming. And so welcome to the world of dock management. I hope you successfully did. Oh, we got more people in on this. Jeff Cohen, dive in again.
Yeah, and all kidding aside, that's actually why I have it scripted, is because I run usually with 3 monitors. And so moving it from left to right is not simply, this side of the screen or the other. It means, is it all the way to the right on the rightmost monitor or all the way to the left on the leftmost monitor? And as part of a whole host of other things, so I have some shortcut scripts for all the different work scenarios, one of them being, kind of live on air, or if, in my case, if I'm in my recording booth recording a voiceover, one script, one hotkey, and it does a whole host of moving apps around to the specific window I want, the placement on the window, as well as the dock position.
There you go. It's the power of AppleScript and shortcuts, which is the newest environment for doing some of these things. Peter Sargent.
I suppose the good news here is we may have Paul may have found an alternative to the mic selection process by just increasing the number of screens and where he puts the docks and toolbar.
Yeah, you could have a monitor screen per mic, and Let's move on. But that was a fun discussion, and it shows you that every user has their level of level of comfort with how complex they want to dive into these tools. Under the hood, these things are incredibly complicated or complex, but they have all these fabulous interfaces that make them easier, which I think is a great thing. Let's dive into the next question.
Next question comes from Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri. And Chad asks, Cyber Monday is gone. What are the next best moments to get deals for the gear we need?
Tom Ferguson.
Oh, heck, ignore all the hype that you're getting. And if you really want to get your adrenaline pumping, just wait until December 24th to go shopping.
There you go. Last minute desperation sales the day before. Nigel DeSalle.
Yeah, so I would tell you that if for technology, you've probably missed the window now until maybe a New Year's sale. For more consumer-based stuff, it really depends on how they think Christmas and the holiday season is going to be. And if Christmas and the holiday season looks like it's going to be rough, then you will start to see sales emerge to try and drive some early sales. Depending where you live in the world, if you're in the UK, for instance, then Boxing Day, which is the day following Christmas Day, would be the start of the sales. And then, of course, there's New Year on the sales around that. But I think you've got two things working against you in physical hardware. One is supply chain, and the other is just, the supply chain is not only about parts, but it's about transportation of those parts. So we've yet to see the news articles that FedEx and UPS can't deliver parcels for Christmas, which I predict will happen in the next week. In terms of software, I think you're more likely to see deals come over the holiday period, particularly if people just need numbers to complete their year.
I think Nigel has a good read on this. Also note there are things like televisions that also have their moments around the Super Bowl. There's always a ton of sales in the week leading up to that. And so there are classes of gear that everybody knows, right before NAB, there's usually a lot of announcements. And then a month or so before that, I start seeing prices soften on the things that may be replaced with new, more fancy models at the NAB coming, because people who make this technology know that when they introduce the new model, the old one loses some value. So there's a lot of art to trying to figure out the right time to buy in different categories. Mitchell, you had something before we move on?
And be a good consumer, because some people actually increase their prices during specialty sales. So watch out.
It can happen. That's right. Demand goes up, so do prices sometimes. Let's go on to the next question.
Chris Sabato of Albany, Oregon says, I'm tempted by the current price of the 512 Audio Limelight dynamic mic. Does anyone have any experience with this mic?
I have not heard anybody talk about it yet. We didn't have anybody raise their hand. I didn't have time to look it up. Does anybody on the panel have it, pull it up ahead of time and have any idea what this does? No, I guess not. So this will be another one of those. We'll push back. If it's something that is getting a little more airing, a little more reputation, then please bring it up again and try to get it in as soon as you can in the day, and we'll research more about it and try to get some opinions formed for you. Let's move on to the next question.
Paul Wallace from Austin, Texas. How do you hook up a tiny telescope to a mobile phone?
Mitchell.
With tiny fingers. No, there's a bunch of rigs out there that will slide onto the camera and extend it with a lens or with a telescope, and they connect over the camera lenses that are on your camera.
Yeah, if you look up Samsung or iPhone telescope adapter, you will find a variety. They're typically little plastic things, and they have some fiddly controls top and bottom so that you can capture the eyepiece of the telescope and put it in a little plastic rig right at the camera of your phone, and then kind of tune it up to get them. They're a little fiddly, but they do the job, and you can get your phone to record what's coming through the camera or telescope lens or binoculars. They even have for binoculars. Jesse, you had another thought before we move on?
Oh, just don't forget, if you can put your phone on a telescope, you can put it on a microscope as well. And there's a lot of fun photography in that arena. Amen.
Yeah. So adaptive optics is a pretty big aftermarket thing. They're not terribly expensive too. You can usually get one of those rigs for, $20-$30. They don't have to be super expensive. Let's move on to the next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. A bit off topic, but my venerable water bottle died. Dropped it on concrete one too many times. What's your favorite carry bottle for long outdoor shoots?
Ooh, Jeff Cohen will help us.
I really had hoped someone else would chime in on this, so I didn't have to. But as embarrassing, perhaps, as it may be, I buy a lot of gifts for my nieces from Lululemon, and I rack up all these points. And I had to find one day, what do I use it on? And they have this water bottle that I don't know what kind of space-age polymers or whatever they're using, but I mean, I put cold water in this without ice, go to the pool. I'm there for hours in the hot Miami sun, and it's cold when I open it. So I don't know what voodoo they've done, but it's really good.
Maybe more than just a vacuum gap between it. Peter Sargent, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just use an Nalgene bottle.
Okay, yeah, those have been around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, a good Boy Scout always has at least one or two of these handy.
There you go. And they're is it PCBs? There's a PE something free plastic that I guess important in this. Next, Jesse Kussler.
I don't have it here to demo, but the water bottle I use is a thermos from, I believe, the 50s or 60s, and it keeps the water hot for over 48 hours. It's incredible.
Wow, there you go. Javier.
I use a metal one that I think I bought at Target that has like a hook that you can get it from anywhere. But when I'm doing like long shots, especially in places that are far from water, I sometimes use like a Camel, like the one like the runners use. So you can have it and you have like 3 liters. So it's like a lot of water that you can keep like really close by.
Yeah, if you're I used to work in Phoenix a lot. I never had one of the Camelback kind of things, but water is incredibly important. Javier? Oops. Oh, that was Javier. I'm sorry.
The
Serge.
Camel again.
Yeah, the Camel again. I'm sorry. I got mixed up on my screen. Serge.
My first go-to is my Contigo because of the way it auto-shut the lid. And I drink so fast that I need to refill. So if I don't have a way to refill, I will bring another water bottle with a thermal way to keep it cold for the time being.
We could have a long debate about cold or room temperature that would go on for hours, but let's move on to the next question.
Lois Richter, Davis, California asks, if one does not use AppleScript, is there a collection of AppleScripts that one can grab and use?
Jeff Cohen.
I'll assume the question is if one does not use AppleScript yet, and there's lots. One I'll show you is, if you can see this screen, Sal Segoyan was the godfather of scripting and automation at Apple. And he put up this, and he ran this site for years and years and years, and has kept it up after they let him go. They let him go as a clear sign, by the way, that their focus and direction is on shortcuts, not on AppleScript. So, they're not even really maintaining it or adding new features. So I would highly encourage you to, if you want to automate on the Mac, at a minimum, there's lots of other tools, but really focus on shortcuts, and like I demonstrated earlier, fill in whatever holes that shortcuts can't do with AppleScript, but try and do it with shortcuts.
Yeah, Sal for many years was the godfather of Automator, which was the program that we all got for free and probably ignored for the first 2 years we had our Macs, and suddenly discovered it and went, oh my gosh, this thing does everything brilliantly. And I can't tell you how many hours of my life were saved by figuring out how to do repetitive tasks using Automator. So yeah, but I definitely agree with what Jeff was saying, that that's moving into the shortcuts environment. If you do not want to go into the programming process and use AppleScript or something like that, if your brain just doesn't work that way, you can still do a lot of things with the shortcuts environment in terms of pulling in and dropping activity plugins and building little workflows and things like that. It should be a lot of fun. I think if I was young and just starting out in my computing career, I would dive into that as well. Let's see. Next question.
Kyle Heyman from Chicago, Illinois says Samsung T5s are up in price. What are people's suggestions for alternatives?
And we've got a few people who have alternatives, including Jesse Kessler. Jesse?
We've moved from T5s to T7s, and even though the buffer cache is a little smaller on the T7s, I'd rather be shooting on a fresh T7 than a year or 2-year-old T5.
Jesse, have you had any problems with the problem we used to have with T7s that they just didn't mount as easily? Have they fixed all of the firmware walls on them so that they work like the T5s? Particularly, I'm thinking of in things like attaching them to Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras. We had problems getting them to read, so kind of everybody stayed away from them for a while.
We still have problems.
Okay. So for your use case, make sure before you switch to T7s that they will do everything you need to do. Serge, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I think I heard the panel recommend a few months ago the SanDisk. I'm using one with my Blackmagic Extreme ISO, and I don't have any issue. So it might be a good replacement for the T5.
Cool. One of the things about the Blackmagic cameras was they had a lovely little small rig holder for the T5s that lets you mount it really securely. Has anybody come up? Do you know if they've come up with anything for the SanDisk kind of things that do the same thing? Is anybody? I don't see any hands raising. So let's move on. Nigel, and then Peter, and then Mitchell. So Nigel, go ahead.
Yeah, ditto for the SanDisk. You can get a 2 terabyte one for about $250 on Amazon. It says it's 50% off, but it's really been about that price and for a while. And I don't see much movement up or down in these prices. Every so often I go on and see if the 4 terabytes drop below $500 or something, but it's never got there. But I really like these little ones.
Excellent. Peter Sargent.
I would just remind everyone that, particularly in the case of Blackmagic, they publish a list of what are the devices they've tested with and will stand behind the fact that they will work with their equipment. So for a long time, the T7s were not on that list for certain pieces of equipment. The T5s were, and oddly enough, it depended on the case of the Blackmagic 6K, it depended on whether you were shooting 50 frames per second or 60 frames per second, whether or not which one you could use. So buyer beware, read the directions.
Excellent. Mitch Hill?
Yeah, +1 on what Peter just said. Also be careful with the T5 and the T7. If you work them too hard or you get close to halfway through them, they slow real down. They go way down there. I use the G drives.
All right. We've got a bunch of questions in the queue here and more audio coming in. And I'm happy to see, I got a note here that one of our audio gurus is sneaking in for the second hour. So if you have audio questions for today as advertised, please don't hesitate to throw them in. We'll keep getting better as we go. Jesse?
Just to be clear, sorry, the interfacing problems were with the Blackmagic Pocket cameras, not with the ATEM. The ATEM seems to be much more forgiving than the Pocket Cinema cameras.
Okay, so if you're using a T7 for switching purposes and capturing data, you're not in difficulty. If you're attaching it to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, I know the 6K is the one that I use, so I've had that issue with it. It doesn't show up as reliably. So next question.
Mark Giuliani, Washington, D.C. says, I have a MixPre 3 and I need to send it back. And he wants to know, how does one move noise assist from one MixPre 3 to another?
Tom Ferguson.
Well, the bad news is the noise assist plugin is unique to each unit and cannot be transferred between the recorders. However, if it were me, I'd give a call to Sound Devices and twist their arm on this deal because it sounds like you have a unit that's failing on you.
Yeah, they could probably serial numberize. That's not even a term. Serialize. They could probably switch it for you at the shop. So let's move on to the next question.
Kenny Hampton, Greenville, Illinois. With the proliferation of communication through text messages, what are some tools that sight-restricted users utilize for both entering and receiving data via text message?
Well, there's a long history of all sorts of services that people who have all sorts of visual impairment, moving from people who cannot see at all to people who have limited vision. Harshit, thankfully, is going to pop in.
Sure thing. And so I use a lot of dictation. Give an example, on the Pixel phones, they have started using something called Quick Assist, or voice assist or something. I can't remember the term, but it's assistant to the assistant. So you would hit dictation, but you could say simple terms like send or delete last word or something like that. The other format that really works out for a lot of people is to use the Siri, to use Google Assistant. But I don't necessarily recommend those because you lose the habit of using your device to its full extent. Dictation is one thing because you could be on a form, you could be on a text message, you could grab links from a website, copy them, YouTube, for example, paste them. So it's far better to communicate with dictation versus using an assistant, because the assistant might not capture all you have to say. Then you have to argue with it and fight with it. And then finally, when you get the message done, you're fatigued. So the best bet to communicate with sight or with little or no sight, I would say dictation works best. QWERTY keyboards are your best friends. You could get a iClever for $18-20. There are plenty out there. I personally use a Logitech. What is it? The mechanical MX. I got the blue one. I should probably get the ortholinear. The blue one makes it a little bit easier to type. It has functionality where if I need to switch from a, let's say, Mac or PC to a phone, I could still have a well-rounded way of communicating. So, example, messages, I could post it up on a web link on my PC. I could then start typing and copy paste right from my PC, so I don't have to necessarily be on that hardware device to complete that task.
Very nice. All right. Hopefully that helps you out. Let's move on to the next question.
Gualberto Espechi, Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Without breaking the bank, how would you extend an SDI cable to cover a distance around 500 feet?
Serge Blondin's going to help us. Serge?
The cheapest way to do it is to have a jump point that you will use an SDI splitter or something like that will repower the signal to be able to do another 200 feet or something like that. It's not the best way because you could have a problem that jump point lost power or someone touch it or anything like that will cause a loss of signal. But it's the cheapest way I know of.
Mitchell.
I've seen fiber adapters that'll go on there and transfer it temporarily to fiber and then undo it, decode at the other end.
Yeah, so a middle leg that was something other than SDI. So SDI to fiber across the long distance, and then fiber back to SDI on the other end.
But I imagine that the question was to not go with the fiber, because fiber, depending of the situation, the cost of passing the fiber will be prohibitive.
You're right. He says in his first line, without breaking the bank. So that could get a little pricey. All right, let's continue on to the next question.
Next question from Hershey Trivedi in Daytona Beach. And here on the panel, he says, well, I love the company with office hours. I need some help with the decision. Should I go ahead and upgrade to Windows 11? It's a 9th generation i7, 2.6 gigahertz, 32 gigabytes RAM, and all that fun stuff with NVIDIA discrete video.
Serge has volunteered to help you.
I see no issue with you having Windows 11 on that. The only thing is I'm going to ask you to make sure that all the software you plan to use are compatible and know of to be compatible. It's not that there are a lot of software not compatible with Windows 11, but never know when you can cause a problem with your workflow.
Excellent. And some of our audio gurus have showed up. I see Jeff Francis in the panel view. Chris Fenwick is here. We're going to continue on the last couple of questions here and then make our switch over. So next question.
All right. Question from Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh. The Kilo Show voting Discord channel is now live. Find it under future shows category. Guide the show, vote on suggestions that appear in the discussion channel, same section, and offer support. The latest item is, should we make or order patches for the Kilo Show? Thoughts?
John Preto is going to help us with that. And then I'm going to wag my finger at him because your patches were so cool that now everybody wants patches, and we're going to have patches all over the place. So John,
everybody wants patches. I printed these two. This is the original OH Space, which many of you guys have. Here's the new mission patch for next year, which we just printed off. I print these at a site called thestudio.com. You upload your AI file, and then they walk you through the process. Their lead time is usually around 3 to 4 weeks right now. So that's my only concern with having to order them on the studio, Josh. That's the only concern. It's really easy to do if we have the artwork. I'm not a graphic artist. Maybe Chris Fenwick can design those and we can upload those to thestudio.com.
You realize the cost of those is negligible, but then you got to buy a bomber jacket to put them on, and they can be incredibly expensive. So, Harshid, you wanted to note something about this?
Quick answer is yes, but any kind of swag that we could get for office hours, shirts, T-shirts, polos, badges, keep it coming.
Badges? We do, guys.
Badges?
Anyway, moving on to the next question.
Paul Terry Wallace from, where'd he go? From Austin, Texas. What's the best swag you ever got at a trade show?
Oh, that's a tough one, man. For those of us who have been to hundreds and hundreds. Jeff Francis, what's your answer?
I actually have a JBL little Bluetooth speaker that sounds great, and it's actually a really good. It's kind of replaced the old Oratone for me as like a way to listen to a mono speaker and see what it's going to list like, what people are going to hear when they listen in sort of normal environments. It's my garage speaker most of the time.
I was trying to find mine in my pen drawer here, but I don't see it. My dear friend Chris Hurd used to give out a fabulous pen that was a combination of laser pointer, touch screen pen thing. It actually had a pen and it could write with it. And there was one other function. I can't remember what it was, but I used to look forward to getting a new one of those every year because I used it up entirely over the course. Do you have a DV info one? Looks like, no. Anyway, let's move on to Chris Fenwick.
I actually had a pair of Hewlett-Packard boxer shorts once. That was weird. Some of the events that I work at, which I can't actually, I don't actually participate in, I've seen some really spectacular, like, leather briefcases and computer bags and stuff like that. I didn't actually get any. Well, I've probably gotten a few over the years, but swag is interesting. You either go down I want something that's kitschy that somebody will never forget about, or some companies choose to go down I want to actually give you something that's classy that you're actually going to use. And I prefer the classy ones, although I don't know any classy people.
Mitchell.
Got a Sony satin jacket one time with the Sony logo on it. Said "Make Believe" or whatever that slogan was.
Tom Ferguson.
Well, in the satin jacket routine, I got one for Lotus Agenda. Who remembers either one of those?
No, the jacket didn't help him much. Nigel.
So often it's not what you see, it's who you know, because there are different levels of swag. And there's the dumpster diving swag you get, which is the pens and the squeezy tools. And then I got this at a trade show. This is a Bang & Olufsen Bluetooth speaker. Let me tell you, they were not giving these away generally, but if you knew the right person, you could ask.
Yeah, that's very true. I remember one year I went to NAB, and because I knew the right people, I got the nicest lanyard I've ever seen, and it was from Canon. I remember that. And and this was many years ago before they were everywhere, it had a little thumb drive integrated into it. You couldn't tell it was a thumb drive unless you pulled the bottom part off. But the thing that amazed me is every year I would go and I would always get my badge, but then you'd have to get a lanyard extra, and it was always a hassle. So having a really nice black satin lanyard with a memory thumb drive in it was very cool. Jesse Kessler and then Tom Ferguson, then we'll move on.
I couldn't disagree with the panel more. My favorite swag is always stickers because it ends up on my hard camera cases, and I remember that trade show or whatever it was for the rest of my career.
There you go. Perfectly defensible position. Tom Ferguson.
And probably the best piece of swag I ever got is going to go up in a rocket next year, and that is a 360-degree camera that I handed off to John Bretto.
Excellent. Well, that'll benefit the entire community. We appreciate that. All right, we got a couple more to get through before we switch into the second hour focus. So next question.
Here's a question from Chad Lafarge in Columbia, Missouri. Scripting in any language can simplify many tasks. Chad asks, can you provide a few examples of things you learned to do with scripts that save you time?
Next. Well, yeah, I mentioned that I used Automator a lot, and the most used part of it was I used to get constantly every few days a long text document that I needed to break out into individual pieces. It was like a big run a show thing, and I needed a card with each one. So I developed an automator script to do that, to take the carriage turns and or tabs and or whatever and break it all out and turn it into a folder full of things. And I probably used that 1,000 times, and it saved me probably 1,000 hours of work. So that was really cool. Chris Fenwick, and then Harshid, then Jeff Francis. Chris?
At the high level, the thing about scripting, and I'm horrible at it, but what you always end up having to do is you have to do the math, so to speak. Like, how much time is it going to take you to save time, and will you save more time than the time that you put into trying to save time, right? And so your example, Bill, I totally get what you're talking about. Sounds really cool, and it obviously in your instance it paid off well. But I think that a lot of times we think we're going to save time by trying to save time, and we end up spending more time to try to save that time. And that just seems like a waste of time. The best thing that I ever made, I made a Photoshop, I don't even know what they call it, automation, something. And this was nearly 30 years ago, where I had to take a image, a layer, that needed a drop shadow. And this is before Photoshop just had the little tink, you turn on the drop shadow. And I had to select all the active pixels. I had to make a new layer. I had to fill it with black. I had to put it underneath. I had to select all. I had to blur it. I had to offset it by 10 pixels down and over. And I had to do this about 300 times for like 300 lower thirds for a show. And I wrote this little automator thing, and I could just go click, and it would go click, click. And then I said, apply it to a whole folder. And I thought I was, Geordie LaForge. It was pretty
Isn't
cool.
it? It's a rush. It is a rush when you manage to do something like that. Harshid.
I just want to share that scripts come in many flavors and many types of things. So I use a screen reader called Job Access with Speech called JAWS. It's built off of scripts. And so if I need an application like Zoom or any others, people do build scripts. So I highly recommend the community to go out there, maybe develop what you have if you're a programmer. If you like scripting or such, it will make you good money because accessibility makes a lot of good money.
There you go. Jeff Francis.
Very simple script created in Apple Automator and turned into, I think they call it a droplet. So it's a little icon, and I actually put it in the top of my Finder window. And what this script does is it takes any audio file and it compresses it to an MP4 AAC. And it's great because if I have a file that I want to send to a client to let them review it, I don't need to send them a full WAV file. And sometimes it might be, dozens or hundreds of takes from a session that they need to review. And so compressing that down to MP4 for review is great. So I can just drag files onto that and it creates those files. Saved me so much time. Spent, maybe an hour building it, and it saved me countless hours using it.
Those are the good ones. Javier.
The one that I use the most are the first one. I did it in Apple Shortcuts, the new app that it switches my lights to when I start my workday. It launches some apps. It switches the lights to the setting that I want to put on the do not disturb. So it's like something that I do every day. So I prefer to, instead of launching every app by hand, like doing it all the way. And since it can control the home automation and everything that Apple ecosystems, it works perfectly. And the other one that I use a lot, I did it in Automator, and it creates a folder structure because in most projects that I work, we have a lot of people contributing. So everyone names things different, like put in different folders. So I created a script that made like a folder structure where it's like, even it's numbered. So like the first number folder is named like 1 brief, and the second one like all the budgeting, and the third one the logistics, and the fourth like references, and inside that maybe like an art references, a music reference. So that keeps like all the projects, when anyone gets to a project can browse it and see the folder structure and understand it. And if you try to do it by hand, you always forget one folder or one name, or so, and that keeps it everything like clean and ordered.
Serge.
Two things I want to mention. First, I agree with Chris that sometimes the time you need to program something or script something will be so much time that you will not save anything. Use the tool, look for a tool that might have already these automation already set up in it. And if you really need a script, look on Google. Someone might have already a script that do pretty much what you want. If it's not 100% what you want, you think you can take the script and just modify what you need, and you don't have to rethink everything. That's where you save a lot of time.
Jeff Cohen, before we're getting close to the end of our first hour list, and then we'll be switching over. So, Jeff?
The one thing, Chris is absolutely right. And, anyone that's dove into scripting is, on this one thing, Chris. So anyone that's dove into scripting certainly has reached that point where now you've spent way so much time in trying to get this thing to work that you will never recoup that time in all the time that you will save from now till eternity. But, the one thing I'll say time and time again, even in the quest to do that, you're going to learn things and discover features and capabilities that maybe it doesn't help you here. And maybe you've really wasted a lot of time, but it will help you for something else. So, I would encourage you to, think about what Chris said, because it's absolutely true. If it's something you're going to do once or twice, no point in automating it. But, if you're going to do something, really complex and launch a bunch of programs and, like Javier, I have something similar. It's my good morning script, and it launches all the apps I'm going to typically use and places them in the exact position. I mentioned I have an on-air script that loads the specific apps I need with a digital audio interface. It actually loads the specific settings. So I'm at the predetermined gain. I also can automate different audio interface settings for different projects. So specific gain settings, specific headphone settings. So that's really nice to be able to lock something in. And then one other trick I'll mention is if you don't have easy access to do home automation. So I also, with that, I close curtains, I set lights. If you are using anything else like SmartThings or IFTTT, IFTTT now has an app integration, but only on iOS for whatever reason. So there's now an app module for iOS shortcuts that will directly launch IFTTT, whatever they call them now. But all of those typically offer webhooks, which you set up on IFTTT or on SmartThings, and it basically gives you a URL. And then you can plug that URL into your automation script, and it will do that other thing. So it's super handy.
Nice. Okay. We have a couple more questions and then we're going to switch over. So let's get to the next one.
Douglas Carmichael wants to know, has Blender been used for professional level 3D workflows, or is it confined to lower budget workflows?
Mitch, then Jesse, real quick. Mitch?
Sure has. It's a very deep program, open source. It's just got some GUI issues, but I use it. And it's also very helpful for transcoding files from one form to another, so you can use it in C4D if you need to.
Jesse, you have a thought?
I think you'll see it in low to mid-range. I don't know how much Blender you're going to see in Avengers Age of Ultron, but we definitely source from Blender users when we need CGI because there's a large install base in our budget range.
And we have one more question before the second hour transfer, so let's dive into it.
One more from Douglas Carmichael. He says, my dear friend Spencer, the developer of Project Nocturne, develops in Unity, but Unreal Engine seems to rule the live slant virtual production roost. Which one is more marketable in our industry?
I think it's safe to say that Unreal Engine is a juggernaut now, and it's pretty hard to, if you understand that heavily, I can't imagine you not finding work for a long period of time. I have not, I think Unity's coming on. It's a strong contender, but right now I think more people talk about the former rather than the latter, but who knows where it's going to go. All right, that should finish up our first hour. Our second hour audio discussion, for those of you who got the note and said that we're going to be diving into audio for the second one, we have some of our audio experts here on the panel, so let's just make the transition and slip right in.
First question from Tony Mobley. He says, I have a house of worship question. My worship leader was using bone connecting mic and headset. She stopped using them because another leader is in the same room. What microphone will help them both in Zoom worship experience?
And Jeff Francis, our audio guru for today, is here. Jeffrey, what do you think?
Tony, I think first of all, we need a little more information. My first question is, are these two leaders in two separate instances of Zoom and yet sitting in the same room together? That's going to cause huge problems unless they are completely isolated, meaning that their headphones need to block out external sound so that they don't hear the acoustic sound of the other person talking in the room. And their microphone needs to be isolating enough that their microphone only picks up them and not the other person. And that may have been the problem they were having with bone conduction, but I'm not clear from the question whether they're both in the same instance of Zoom through some kind of mixer and camera switcher, or if they're in actually two instances of Zoom.
That makes sense. Would bone conduction, because it's relying on a physical transducer on your body, I can't imagine a lot of crosstalk between them. Jeff, do you have experience? Does that happen if you have two people on bone conduction mics next to each other, that one picks up the sound of the other?
I think they're not getting it from the microphone. I think what's happening is the headset is not blocking out the room sound. So they're hearing the other pastor through Zoom late, and they're hearing them in real time acoustically across the room.
That makes perfect sense.
They need is headsets that block out or noise canceling.
Yeah, that would be disorienting to the extreme. Kenneth had a thought?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The whole concept of bone conduction headsets is to allow you to continue to hear in real time in your environment. And that's exactly what you don't want to hear now, because you're going to hear the same thing delayed through the headset. So that's disconcerting to all of us. And as Jeff suggests, I think physical separation would be the best thing, but put each one in a closet. But good earmuffs would be the way to get around that and not use the bone conduction headsets.
Yeah, I noted before I did a brief stint as a stadium announcer, and hearing yourself back with a 1 or 2 second delay is virtually impossible to deal with unless you're a professional and you've really conditioned yourself to do it. Jeff, you had another thought?
The other thing would be to try to use one instance of Zoom, but then you're going to need either both of them close to the same microphone and hearing the same audio feed from Zoom, or you're going to need a person running an audio mixer and a video switcher to switch their feed into Zoom. But basically, it's the two Zooms in one room. You really can't do that because there's so much delay.
Okay, we have a few more audio questions here, so we'll end a little early unless people have other things they want for our audio panel today. Let's go on to the next question.
Brody Hefner asks, what's the recommended approach to gain staging audio in a Zoom setup with the MixPre interface? There are gain settings available on the MixPre, in Zoom audio settings, in the computer's audio settings, and sometimes on the mic itself.
Javier will start us off here.
I would start from the beginning. That's meaning that I will start with the mic. So I will start like setting everything at 0. So no path or attenuation on the microphone. And if it has like a volume knob, like some USB mics has it, I'll put it in 0 with like no gain or attenuation. And then Zoom, I never let Zoom audio compensate or anything like that with the software that just like keeps the volume up or down. So leave everything at 0 and then start with the MixPre, because that's like your main gain staging. So you try to give the level with that. If the volume coming in, even if you're in 0, goes too hard, then you can start engaging the attenuation pad on the microphone. But if not, I will control the gain with the MixPre and then repeat. Zoom, I wouldn't let Zoom touch my audio gain.
Chris Fenwick. Chris, you're muted, I believe. Somehow.
Start by unmuting.
Yeah. The thing about gain staging is you have to start by unmuting your microphone.
Works best.
It's good. It's a good example that you really do have to start at the source. The best telltale sign of poor gain staging is when you can hear something quietly that is distorted. Okay, if you think about that, it's quiet, but it's distorted. And that just means it got distorted further up the chain, And then somewhere downstream, you pulled the volume down to make it not loud, but it's still distorted. It's quietly distorted. So the only way to deal with that is you have to start at the beginning. And ideally, if you can listen at various levels of the gains, at the various points, that can be handy. In today's day and age with everything being completely digital, that's a lot harder to do. But you have to start at the beginning. And I will tell you a tip. It's not a tip. I'm going to confess a poor choice of workflow. Workflow is not the best thing. I have a MixPre, and I also have a Korg Nano controller. It's a little MIDI, MIDI volume. It's a little tiny mixer, little tiny faders. And I set my gain. Looks like I'm a little hot, aren't I? I set my gain at my microphone so that when I push the fader for my mic channel all the way to the top, it's where it should be for this show. Mickey's commenting in my ear. I don't recommend doing that, but it's what I do. Because that way, if I want to get my mic back to where it's supposed to be, I just push that fader all the way up. There's a million other places I can gain it down, but it's what I do. Don't do it.
Nigel's going to help us out too. Nigel?
Yeah, yes, I too have one of those Korg things, although you have to play with the faders every morning. Otherwise, it doesn't recognize it or I'm doing it wrong. I would tell you that, and it's sort of an adjacent point here, that Keith Harrison in March of 22 published on Makana a guide to setting up side tone on your MixPre 3. If you can't find it, send me a message and I will send you a copy. I keep it around my personage all the time. I think it's if you're a MixPre user, it's really a useful tool to check that your MixPre 3 is set up sort of a la Mickey if you can't get him on the phone. And that will help you at least get that side of it right, and then you'll have the side tone to listen to.
Jeff Francis.
So if you're dealing with a sort of computer microphone, something in the OS, AirPods, or the mic built into your computer, there's going to be a control in the software OS, and Zoom talks to that. So that's the audio slider that's in your Zoom settings that also changes that same slider. If it's a USB interface, whether that's a USB microphone like the Shure MV7, I think I have the number right, or a USB interface from like a MixPre 3, then the gain stage is going to be upstream towards the microphone. So if it's a pure USB mic, like a Shure MV7 used as USB mode, then you need to do the settings on the Shure microphone itself. If it's an XLR mic, which could be that Shure MV7 plugged into into a MixPre 3, then you need to do the gain staging in the analog mic preamp, and that's going to be in the MixPre 3.
And Mitchell to finish us up.
Yeah, Jeff has a good example there. I hear a lot of people, the MV7, punching the volume all the way up, and they have auto set on Zoom, and you just get that crushed, compressed sound. So best not to use auto, and best to allow the microphone to do its job ahead of, just as Jeff was saying.
There you go. Hopefully some help for you, Brody. Let's move on to the next question.
Lois Richter from Davis, California says, if I can't use my good mic, would a gamer's headset with a microphone be okay to record a radio show? Or would the iMac's built-in mic be good? I have 2 hours to set up.
We have a lot of people want to weigh in on this. We're going to start with Chris Fenwick.
Lois, I would highly recommend you don't try the gamer's headset. They just have a sound to them. It's highly compressed. It sounds like you're trying to, 2 hours, you should be able to set up your other mic. I would push through to use your good mic, as you put it.
Jeff Cohen.
Yeah, The answer is yes. Both of the points in your question are very relative, right? Your good mic, what is that? And is it okay? I mean, what's the definition of that? It depends. What's the nature of the show? How do you want to come across? How often are you on the show? Is it something you do regularly and you should think about a better solution? I mean, gaming headsets, also to Chris's point, aside from the sound, are pretty bulky. I mean, if you're able to have your gamer's headset with you, I would ask the question, why don't you have the good stuff with you? There's also, I mean, if for whatever reason it's transporting the equipment, everything else, there's some pretty good USB microphones now. They're not going to replace the best interface and XLR mic, but, one I'll point out is the Rode Video Mic NTG. It's a Rode shotgun mic, and it's super flexible. It can, you have to buy different cables depending on what you want to use it for, but you can go into 3.5 millimeter. There's a lightning cable to go right into an iPhone or iPad. So it's really flexible for that one mic and pretty reasonably priced.
Mitchell.
We spent some time last night on After Hours with Lois. It's also a reason why she's not reading today, is that both of her USB inputs are exhibiting a problem with her Yeti mic. She did an upgrade to the software. We turned that software off. We tried to slush back. So even her backup microphone, which is, I guess, another Yeti, is not going to work on her iMac. So from my ear, what I heard you experimenting with last night before I had to go to bed was that, believe it or not, that iMac microphone in a pinch sounds pretty good as long as you stay close to it. It sounded okay to me. I wouldn't go to the headset because of the reasons that Chris was saying, and also I didn't get a chance to hear it. I thought your iMac sounded okay.
Jesse Kessler.
I would test them, and I don't disagree entirely, but about 9 times out of 10, I'd rather have a cheap microphone 3 inches from the source than an expensive microphone 3 feet from the source. So this really goes back to testing, but I wouldn't write off that gaming headset straight away.
Jeff Francis.
When you consider the iMac built-in mic, you need to consider the room. How noisy is the room? How reverberant is the room? So if you can get a dead enough room, the iMac can work. And it may be a situation where you have to put some sound absorbing material, blankets, pillows, cushions out of frame around you to deaden down the room in a pinch. Done that in hotel rooms. I've grabbed pillows off the bed and built a little cloud around my computer when it's the only mic I had.
And Jeff Cohen.
I'll just throw the question out there for Lois and Mitch. Maybe if the USB ports are completely not working, did she try the 3.5 millimeter jack on the iMac?
That's an interesting thought. Mitchell?
We tried everything. There's just something very, very weird going on with her setup. We had 4 or 5 of us trying to work through it.
Because if that works, with TRRS, even the Apple earbuds, in other words, just to test if that works for both ears and the mic, then again, barring fixing the whole computer, you can get a mic that just has 3.5 millimeter like that Rode or something else, and then that could conceivably work through there and it'd be better than if that's what her headset does.
But how would you patch the 3.5 millimeter input into Zoom? I don't recall seeing a Zoom setting for that. USB, it usually sees directly.
It's considered the internal mic at that point, whatever you plug into that jack.
Okay. So
Lois just updated us. USB is fine. It seems to be a Yeti specific problem on 2 microphones.
Ooh. Well, it's not the world's most expensive microphone, and they have sold a lot of them. So maybe it's a production issue. Maybe there were some bad chips or something. Hard to say. I'm not pointing a finger. I'm just saying when you see 2 pieces of hardware and both of them fail in the same way, that's always a little bit of a red flag to me. I think we've talked around this a ton. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, Jeff, I'm sorry. I pulled the trigger and they did in the back end. So sorry, Jeff. We'll come back to you. Next question.
Hershey Trivedi of Daytona Beach, Florida. Can someone explain the advantages of MIDI, especially in an audio chain that supports MIDI inputs and outputs? Chris Fenwick, for example, uses a Triton in his setup.
Let's start with Jeff. Jeff.
So the first thing to think about MIDI is what MIDI is not, which MIDI is not audio. MIDI is simply performance data. So when you touch a MIDI keyboard, there are MIDI generating devices, which are performance instruments. You do something, you press a key on a keyboard, and it sends a MIDI message. Play middle C now. And then there are MIDI sound generating devices, which take that information and turn them into an organ or an oboe. But there are also, alongside that, MIDI can be used as controller information. So you could have a slider that sends MIDI data. But the important thing is MIDI is not sound, MIDI is not audio, it's just controller information.
That's very helpful. Javier, you want to take it from there?
Yes, and exactly like taking it where Jeff just said, the advantage of having it like performance information is that you can alter it after it's been recorded. I mean, you can do that in audio. You can like edit and move around. But if you modify, for example, like duration of a note, or maybe like one note, make it like smoother. If it's in audio, you're gonna degrade it. We have tools now that can do it. Like, I don't know, like Melodyne. Now you can, if you have a chord, like a 3-note chord, you can switch one of the notes around, but you're modifying the audio, and it's gonna get worse every time you do it. In MIDI, you can alter everything. Like you can say, okay, let's transpose this like one semitone or 3 semitones, or you can move it anywhere you want. And if some of the keyboard players I know, they do exactly with Triton and other that have MIDI in and MIDI out, they can perform it, then like just adjust some things like some volume or some notes that they are not so happy about, and then use the MIDI in like to get the MIDI again to the keyboard. And then, as Jeff said, then the keyboard becomes a MIDI, well, an audio performance. It reads the MIDI data and sends the new performance out. So you can have like a perfect like human performance, but then like make it the perfect, or you can move it if the singer needs to higher or lower. You can modify in MIDI without degrading anything in audio.
Jesse Kessler.
One of my favorite advantages of MIDI is that has been road tested beyond anything I can imagine. It is so reliable.
There you go. Chris Fenwick.
So, first of all, Harshid, I don't know what a Triton is, so somebody's giving you bad info. I don't know what that is. But here's the way I like to think of MIDI. If I put a video camera on a couple of guys playing chess with the cheapest little travel chess set with little tiny plastic pieces, and I videotaped it, I'm done. But, and Preto could chime in on this, but if you knew all of the like chess lingo, I want to move my queen to pawns bishop 7 or whatever, like I don't know what I just said. But if I took that information and I told these two people to play the game that I'm reading to them with the cheap chess set, and then I pulled the cheap chess set away and put the most beautiful marble and glass and gold or whatever chess set in front of them, and then I read the same information, you'd get the same chess game, but you'd get it more beautifully shot because you're taking the exact same information, but you're just replacing it. We recently had a client who came in and said, hey, this song that we had custom made, we'd like to change it up a little. And I said, talk to the composer, because if we can get the MIDI data from them, because it's all keyboard stuff, if we get the MIDI data from them, we could literally just swap out instrumentation. So you can say, so see this part here that's played on a violin? What if we played it on a flute? And you could take the MIDI data that played the violin and replace the sound module, and instead of playing off of a violin, play a flute sample, but the same move your queen to rook's bishop 12 or whatever. I think I just made a chess set too large.
So basically what we're hearing is that MIDI is not musical data, it's control data. And it controls things that make music, among many other things. Interesting. Let's move on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Many arenas and stadiums talk about allocating a large space for a mix position. something like 20 by 24. With the proliferation of compact control surfaces like the A&H CTi1500, will that be a thing of the past?
And Jeff Francis is going to help us here.
So the front of house position needs to cover sound. It needs to cover lighting. It needs to cover iMag, image magnification. So there may be a video switcher and cameras. There could be LED wall, all kinds of computer stuff running there. So it's more than just the mix position. And usually that's something that's designated in the rider of the group. So the venue is going to hold a space that's going to satisfy like the largest typical event that's coming through. I imagine we'll see that space shrink slightly over time just so they can sell more seats.
Always top of mind for whoever's making the money off of that. Chris Fenwick. Whoops, you're muted, Chris.
When the equipment gets smaller, the space will get smaller. Absolutely guaranteed. What I currently do in 80 square feet in this room used to be hundreds of square feet in multiple rooms. And actually, the picture that I output is much better than it used to be. So yes, you will get much less space.
Oh, Jesse just pinged in here at the end.
When the equipment gets smaller, people seem to find a way to bring in more different types of equipment.
That has been known to happen on occasion. Javier?
And not only equipment is important to have there, even though equipment gets smaller, the mix position is a vantage point in any arena or place. So you have that space needs to be not only for people doing the decisions, like doing the stuff, but taking the decision. So you have to have that place where all the audio, video, and lighting guys have to stand there and have a perfect view, a perfect sound, and everything. Even though you can control your the mixer from the iPad in the stage, it's better to have a place where everyone can be like working there.
All righty, let's move to the next question.
Matthias Hutala from Helsinki, Finland asks, any headset lavaliere microphone recommendations with Lemo 3-pin connector? Use case is speakers on stage and will be used with Sennheiser SK50 and SK3063.
Jeff's going to help us here.
So I would go with either DPA or Countryman. And you need to decide whether you want headset with 2 ear loops or 1 ear loop. 2 ear loops go on easy. And so if you're putting them on people quickly and changing them out, those are great. They sometimes get a problem with hair in the back. If people have long hair, that could be a problem. So then a single ear loop headset works well. You will definitely get better feedback rejection or gain before feedback if you're using a headset where the mic is to the side of the mouth as opposed to a lavaliere mounted down on the chest. But DPA and Countryman both have Lemo connectors. If that's out of your budget, you can look for a company called Microphone Madness that makes sort of knockoffs of those that are fairly decent for speech. They can't really handle the level of singing. And I've just looked, Polson, if you remember from the early days of office hours, the Polson and Pyle headsets, which were, $12 to $15. Those come in just about every wireless manufacturer connector except the Lemo. So that's you're out for that one in the extreme cheap side of things.
Yeah, I was just going to note in the upper end wireless microphones or lavaliers or headsets, you can usually specify which connector you like. So you don't, it's not that this brand comes with this connector. You can order a high-end Countryman and specify, I want to terminate it in XLR, I want to terminate it in one of these other Lemo connectors or something, and they'll give it to you how you want it. It's a little more bespoke than just ordering the product and accepting what it comes with. So let's move to the next question.
James Haldane from Vancouver, Canada wants to know, does the Yamaha LS9 and the QL1 use the same expansion cards?
Jeff?
No, they do not. The earlier Yamaha consoles, LS9, M7CL, and I'm drawing a blank on what the other one is. Someone will tell me. They use a 16-channel card slot. And going to the CL series and the QL series and the TF series, they've gone to a 64-channel card slot, basically to support Dante. So the cards are not compatible.
All right, there you go. Next question.
Jeff Francis from Columbia, South Carolina, and right here on the panel. Does anyone want to hear the Apple wired earbuds into the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack?
Jeff, go in. Jeff, do you want to?
Yes.
He does want to hear that. Okay.
Well, all right. So let's see if this will work. So this should still be my actual microphone. And if I switch over to the external microphone, now are you hearing me on this earbud? Somebody give me a
Yes, in fact, we are. We could hear when you switched.
Okay. So there's the sound of the Apple wired headphones sort of drooping down below my chin. And that's an option for Lois plugging into the iMac.
And for intelligibility, I mean, we can hear every word you're saying. We can understand the communication. So in terms of information delivery, it is working just fine. In terms of qualitative differences, there is a significant difference between the sound of those two things when Jeff's on his regular mic versus when he's on the in-cord mic from a set of wireless or wired headphones. Whether or not that quality difference is mission critical for you, that's up to you to decide. I mean, if it's your only choice and you've got to get audio out of something, that's fine. You can hear what somebody's saying. Aesthetically, it may not be as pleasing, but it's certainly qualified in that respect. Jeff, you had another thought about it?
Yeah, I'll just say, if you need that in a pinch, the biggest problem, as Jeff actually demonstrated, will really pick up if you have a beard, and also if it's rubbing against clothing, especially depending on what you're wearing. So you'll see sometimes people, they're just kind of holding the mic out in front of them, and that's at least going to avoid all that rustling sound that you heard. Again, it's not going to fix the mic, but it will avoid those things. And just as an aside, just a funny thing I was able to do, if you happen to have a friend that has the capability with the lab to do custom silicone molding. I had a friend that took impressions of my ears and then made custom silicone molds on the earbuds, and it is incredible what a difference it makes to the sound of these. They're just okay, decent earbuds, but it's incredible when it's that perfect seal that this does, how good these cheap earbuds sound.
Jeff Francis.
It's a good solution when the other option is someone shouting at their laptop. So it can get the mic at least close to them. You can put a short extension cable on that because it does restrict you as far as distance from that, and you kind of get this wire that's dangling around. So if you can get a short extension, I would keep it. I'd try to get a 3 foot, and you can maybe go with 6 feet, but you do begin to get into noise problems extending that very delicate, unbalanced signal. But you can use a short. Make sure that the extension cable you get is a TRRS. Needs to have those 4 connections to get stereo audio and microphone.
Makes sense. Let's move to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've been looking at a Sequential Prophet-5/10. Considering it only has a mono output, would it make more sense to get the 5 if it'll be used along with other synths for a specific role in a track and not a lead instrument?
And Douglas, unfortunately, no one has raised their hand on this. I'm not sure if anybody on this panel is familiar with the Prophet 5/10, but it is, we have so many people come through here that this is going to be one of those circumstances where hang on to the question and bring it back another day, and maybe you'll have more luck with it. Sorry, we just don't have. Well, Jeff Francis has a last minute thought here. Jeff?
I'm vaguely familiar with it, and I think what the reason Douglas will be getting it is for the sound of that particular synth. So if it's the sound you want, go for it. If it's one instrument, mono is really important. I mean, lead vocal is arguably the most, or I would say inarguably the most important thing of most popular music. And that lead vocal is up front, center, mono, because it connects.
There you go. Next question.
Hershey Trivedi of Daytona Beach, Florida. What's your most budget setup for a solid quality setup with an XLR mic and interface? Include the cables and the cost, if possible.
Fenwick's going to start us out. Chris, take it away.
So, Hershey, the thing that I would recommend is and we've been talking about this a lot lately, about when you have a problem to solve, you have to pick the right variable with which to solve it. And oftentimes, money is the wrong one to do. You'd be better off buying something that's really good, that will last longer, that's going to sound great. And a lot of times we back into the problem of budget in a way that's detrimental. I always use the phrase buy once, cry once. And this is why I really like the Shure MV7. Because if you want a quality XLR microphone, sounds great. But you can use it with USB until you have the money to buy a quality, not a budget, but a quality input gizmo thing, and good cables. Like I never try to tell people to spend a lot of money that's not worth it. This is a bad group of friends to hang out with if you're on a tight budget. But the MV7 is a great way to get a good microphone that you can start using it in a very budget-friendly way via USB, and save your shekels until you can actually buy a really good input. And at that point, it's a different discussion.
Javier.
I agree completely with what Chris just said, but I think you can add another option from Shure that is like a perfect budget solution, but also a good quality and good build and sturdy microphone. Is an SM58, like a classic mic, and it's very, very. It takes a lot of damage and it keeps working perfect, and that's a good idea, and it sounds good. Maybe not the best sounding mic, but it sounds good, and it's around $90 or 80 something. And I would pair that with a Behringer Euphoria interface that is like, I think, around $40 or $50. So you have a pretty decent XLR setup for less than $130, $140.
Jesse.
The most inexpensive we go for interfaces is the Zoom H5, and there are cheaper Zooms than this. The reason we go with the Zoom is because we use it in studio and we use it in field, and this kind of covers both those arenas. The one thing you want to look at with the Zoom is to make sure that it has the physical dials on it. You don't want to be doing your volume with a digital interface.
There you go. And Harshid, it's your question. You have another thought?
I just had a thought on that, and I agree with the budget. I like to keep it in quality rather than cost. Cost is always going to be detrimental, I think, but in this day and age, everybody's trying to get into the same creative space or, do singing and get into this world that we're in virtually. So it's sometimes hard, and you get a lot of pushback when you start saying, hey, the mic's going to cost you $100, the interface could cost you $180, cables could cost you $40, and then, they're just like, oh, I don't have that budget. So.
Yeah, well, I understand that. The peripherals sometimes surprise you, particularly as you move up to more and more expensive gear. Sometimes their peripherals get equally more and more expensive and drive you crazy. Next question.
Lois Richter, Davis, California. Other than listening to all the old office hour shows, what's the matter with that? What would you suggest as the best way to learn about basic audio subjects? Any favorite tutorials?
Jeff's going to help us out. Jeff?
I've kind of cheated because I saw Lois has a question later. I would recommend that she do what she did there, which is to take a specific topic and ask a specific question. So we'll wait for that coming up later.
Okay. In fact, I just went to look ahead. I didn't realize we had that many questions left to go through. Chris Fenwick wants to weigh in on this. Chris?
Yeah, Lois, you don't have to listen to all the shows. Just listen to the ones about audio.
There you go. Harshid, next question.
Rashid Trivedi, Daytona Beach, Florida. Should we really consider the new USB mics that seem to gain momentum, such as the Rode NT Plus, USB, DX, Neom, and more?
And whoops, I was down at the bottom doing something. Jeff Francis is going to help us out here. Jeff?
Yes, we should. They're just getting better all the time.
There you go. Simple as can be. Let's move to the next question.
Rody Hefner, I recently found a nice Shure SM58 mic at a thrift store for $3. It came with its foam windscreen. For use indoors, will the foam serve as an adequate pop filter, or better to use a pop filter without the foam?
Chris Fenwick and then Jeff Francis. Chris?
Just try it. It'll probably be fine. $3 SM58. Even if it doesn't work as a mic anymore, you have a spare hammer in your workshop.
Jeff Francis.
So the 58 is designed to be used without a pop filter. So the windscreen is for wind, for when you're outside. A windscreen and a pop filter are slightly different. What I would do is take that old SM58 and unscrew the top, because probably what you have is 2 layers of metal mesh as a pop filter that directs blasts of air away from the diaphragm. And then inside is another layer of foam, and probably that foam has completely deteriorated. So you at least want to clean it out. And if you can get replacement, that would be a great, another question, where do you get replacement foam for the inside of an SM58? I would have to Google or go to Shure's website.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Did they have the metal ball at the top, which is a windscreen? Did they have a foam windscreen on top of that? They must have been looking for a very bad set of conditions. I thought maybe a 57, which has the kind of little, not the ball head, but the rounded head. Maybe somebody put a windscreen on that. But I'm confused. But hopefully you're not double or triple wind filtering this thing from its normal. I'd pull it off and see if the 58 works the way the 58 was designed.
At last count, Bill, there's probably about 20,000 companies that sold foam windscreens that would slide over the steel ball thing. And sometimes people do it. I've seen people do it just so that they can identify which mic is which on a stage with a bunch of singers. Yeah. It looks ridiculous, but
I have seen that too. I've seen collars and, that's blue, that's yellow. So
it's on the orange mic.
Nerf ones work great.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, let's go on. Hopefully it'll work. They're pretty indestructible. So with luck, good deal. Next question.
Rob Collins, Kansas City, Missouri. Does anyone know of a good interface, preferably with sliders, that can copy the Windows volume mixer in a physical box for on-the-fly volume mixing?
No one has raised their hand on this, so I don't know of anybody who, I don't work in Windows, so I do not know of something that would manage to. Are you looking for automated sliders or just fly volume, for on-the-fly volume mixing? I don't know. I don't know of anything, a USB mixer or something like that you could attach to Windows. Let's move on to the next question. Sorry about that, Ron.
Jeff Cohen, Miami Beach, and here on the panel. For the other voiceover folks, do you prefer doing punch and roll recording or recording straight through and edit later?
It's going to be to taste. Chris Fenwick is going to start us, and then Javier, and then Mitchell. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely to taste. Jeff, I think every once in a while, I have a few clients that ask me to do voiceovers for some of the videos that I create for them. And I got to say, it's really fun cutting my own voice. But I just read and I back up and I read and then I just cut it all later. I think one of the things, and this works with any voiceover talent, you got to remember you're dealing with it. We tend to work with machines. We push buttons. I press stop, it stops. I press play, it plays. I press record, it records. And we are very accustomed to working with equipment. But when we're working with talent, we're working with human beings, and they wear out sooner than the equipment that we're working with. They'll have performance issues. They'll get tired. They'll get frustrated. And dealing with talent in that way is it's the holy grail of professionalism. Like to understand when you can push somebody for another take and when you can't, and when asking them to start over. There's a lot of times when I'll let somebody go and I'm listening going, oh, that was bad. That was bad. That was horrible. Not going to use that. But I let them go. Because they'll get a little better, and then they'll hit a stride. And maybe I'll let them do a whole take through and go, you know what? I think one of my favorite phrases, I think you have a better one in you. Let's do one more. Or actually, I never say one more, because then when you do two more, they go, hey, you said we were going to do one more. Let's do another one. I think you have a better one in you. Let's do another one. So you got to remember, you're dealing with humans.
Absolutely. Javier.
I'm not a voiceover actor, but I direct a lot of voiceovers. So what I tend to do is I send them the script beforehand so they can check it and get to know it. So the first take or the first couple of takes I let them do whatever they want. If they haven't read the script, they read it for the first time. They have some ideas, they can do it all the way around, and that's more natural. And I'll start like making some notes and talk about them for the second or third pass. And then if you have to get some just punching some stuff like tags or like specific intonations that the client wants. But I work from a complete take that's a bass take.
Mitchell Hill?
Yeah, doing voiceover is I generally just mark each take that I do and then come back. And if I have my finger on the M button, depending on what DAW I'm using, it's very easy to see the points that need to be picked up. And it depends. It depends on whether you want to change the paragraph or you want to do the whole page. It depends what kind of mood I'm in sometimes, too. I'll say, that's just not good enough. And I'd hear Chris's voice in the back of my head saying, you got a better one in you. So I would do it that way. The only time I would do a punch and go thing like that is if I'm asked to read with time. So something, let's say I'm fixing somebody else's voiceover with mine, or I'm doing a voiceover to a pre-edited piece, then you got to punch in because the timing is the issue.
Chris Fenwick?
So Mitch, I got to ask, I saw your hand gesture, which nobody else in the show saw when I mentioned you have a better one in you. Would you find that annoying as a voice actor if somebody said, hey, not bad, I think you have a better one in you, let's do another?
Yeah, I would, but I'd keep it to myself.
Well,
what would be,
go ahead,
so what would
Chris.
be a better way to ask you to do another one? Just say, let's do another one.
Do another take. Come on, give us another take.
And what about the phrase bothers you?
It assumes that you didn't know enough to give you the best take the first time around.
So that's possible. I will tell you, most of the time I'm dealing with people that aren't pros.
Then you're okay.
All right.
The pros will get cranky.
My strategy for that, and I've done a lot of that, is that was fabulous. Oh boy, this is going to be so easy. Thank you. Now we're going to do it one more time because I need
you said
to be
it was good. Why are we doing another?
No. Listen to what I'm saying. I need you to do one more because I've already praised them and I want to get adrenaline in them and I want them to feel good and like they're going to nail this. But then I need a little more time in the first paragraph. So you can slow that down just a tiny bit, but then continue on through the rest. I'm going to find some small thing to get them back into that, hopefully with them feeling good about themselves. But that idea of making them feel confident and good is almost more important with an amateur than how they're doing the job. I have a couple more things to say, but Mitchell Hill, go ahead and sneak in.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. Generally, what I would do, Chris, is that I would blame it on a technical glitch. I would just say, we had a glitch for that. Could you do that again? It's the easiest, non-offensive way to do it. And if they're a professional, a lot of times you just make eye contact with them, and they know, oh yeah, I can do that better. Or they'll do another one in line with that. And it's always the last take is the best one.
I think fundamentally I avoid trying to lie to people. If it's not good, I mean, I'm not going to say that's not good. I'm just going to say, hey, let's do another one. And the other thing, and this came from Quincy Jones when they recorded "We Are the World." There's a very famous line when he was dealing with all a room full of professionals. He said, "This is going to be like chopping wood. It's going to be a long night, but we're going to just keep chopping at the wood." So I think that it's different if you're dealing with a pro and somebody who's less experienced.
So my take on this is for me, it depends on, am I doing spot work or am I doing narration? And am I directed or am I not directed in real time? Those four elements change every performance. I famously have dropped all audio things except I do all my audio work in Final Cut now because of two functions that it has that are very useful for me. One is the voiceover tool that allows you to do punch-ins incredibly easy. And the other one is the fact that you can, in narration work, when you're doing something long, when you're doing long takes, the ability to stop for a second and say, I'm going to just do that second paragraph because it's super easy to just chop it and fix. It also has an auditions thing that you can do if you want to get into that. But there are enough tools that for me, am I trying to get into the flow of the script so I can perform, or am I trying to pay attention to what the people on the other side of the glass are saying to me because I need to keep twisting in small amounts what I'm doing? I do it both ways all the time. There's hardly a week goes by that I don't do narration style, where I just want to get the longest takes I can to knock out pieces of the script so I can go back then and focus on little anomalies. But in spot work, I'm working on the first paragraph, and I'm probably going to do it 6 times and pick the best of those 6 first paragraphs to end up in the final spot. So I do all of them. All right. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 more questions. That was such a long discussion. I thought it was interesting because a lot of people here are interested in voiceover, so I let it run long. Let's knock these 4 out and then finish up the day. Next question.
Lois Richter from Davis, California. What is a condenser mic? What are the other kinds?
Jeff, help us out with that, then we'll just move on.
Condenser mic, there are 3 basic kinds of microphones: condenser, dynamic moving coil, and a dynamic ribbon. We typically call the dynamic ribbon a ribbon. We typically call the dynamic moving coil a dynamic. Those 2 are very similar in that they use electromagnetic. So when the diaphragm moves, it moves some kind of metal in a magnetic field that induces electricity. Remember that a microphone is turning sound waves, pressure in the air, into electricity in a wire. A condenser microphone actually uses 2 plates of metal, and one of those is the diaphragm that moves around when we talk into it. The other one's fixed, and so it changes the distance between the 2. Those 2 plates are charged, so imagine they're almost like a little battery, and by changing the distance, we're changing the voltage across that, so we get a varying electrical voltage, and that is the audio.
We get a quick thought each from Javier and Mitchell, then we'll move on.
Oh, complementing what Jeff just said, dynamic mics tend to be omnidirectional. You only capture sound from one place. Condenser mics tend to be either directional, bidirectional, that get sound from both sides, or omnidirectional. They can switch because of how they're made. And ribbon mics are bidirectional. They take sound from both sides, from both ends. So if you speak into a ribbon mic, you also get the back part. And another kind of microphone that is used is the contact microphone, or PSO mic. That doesn't sense the vibrations on the air. It sends the vibrations directly on the surface. So it's very useful for acoustic instruments like guitars and like basses and everything, like for orchestra, let's say.
Mitchell, real quick.
Yeah, they didn't leave much for me, so I'll just say that the condenser, Lois, between comparing a dynamic and a condenser is picking up much more detail and sometimes noise to go along with it. So I like condenser because I can control my voice for the most part. Dynamic, everyday use, no problem. Condensers are very sensitive, not only in terms of the sound, but also in their handling too.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustin from Panama. I recently built my Flykit, and I'm looking for an audio interface slant mixer. What are the suggestions? I'm currently using Scarlett 2i2.
Jeff Cohen.
I'll just briefly mention too that I use Evo 8 from Audient. Is really good, and particularly it's small, it's bus powered, USB-C or USB-A, and one of the things I love about it, it's fully USB compliant. So meaning not only is it driverless, but it also, the device, including an iOS device, Android, anything else, is actually controlling the actual gain and headset volume by the on-device controls. The other one that I like is the PreSonus Revelator IO24, also fairly inexpensive, USB compliant, same thing, driverless, but you can't control it through the device. But it has a fat channel on board, DSP. I think it's $150 right now. So it's got a bunch of effects on board that you can set up and load into the device itself.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Wave's SoundGrid platforms, the eMotion LV1 or SoundGrid Studio, allow the user to dial in a latency value in milliseconds for external inserts on a channel. How can you determine said value? I've heard SMAART can do it, but are there other tools?
Jeff Francis, real quick, and then Mitchell.
So SMAART or other tools like that, SpectraFu will do that for measurement. And basically you're feeding it the original signal and the delayed signal with the latency, and it will calculate that. But you can do that by simply setting up a channel that does not go through the insert and a channel that goes through the insert with the same source. And a metronome works great because it's a very short, definite transient. And then just go, capture that in your DAW and go in and zoom in and measure the delay there.
And Mitch, you got a quick thought?
In a pinch, use your ears.
There you go. Next question, last question for today.
Urshid Trivedi, Daytona Beach, and here on the panel. I hear a lot of people select the KZ S10 for an IEM solution. What are others that the panel likes? Perhaps the IE300s or other participants in the ear audio solution?
Mitchell?
Shure S15s, or 215s, excuse me.
Okay, I use the N-ears. It depends on whether you're just doing speech or whether you want musical resolution. There are different kinds of things. And some of the little security headphones like the N-ear that I use are very good for speech, but they're not particularly good for music. There are other solutions. Jeff Francis, do you have a quick thought before we finish up here?
If you're looking for inexpensive, so sort of $15, almost disposable, the Panasonic ErgoFit are a pretty decent sounding cheap earbud that has some good isolation.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I thought we were going to be short today by a tremendous amount. It turns out we ran over. So thanks, everybody. And that voiceover thing that got a little heavier than I expected it to. Tomorrow, I'm hosting The Talking Camera, a look at why choosing different camera shots and camera moves might make sense. Friday is another day of ruthless reviews, this time behind the scenes. So if you want to know what we all do behind the scenes to show our cameras, we're going to have that tomorrow. On Friday. On Saturday, immersive media and the education group as always. Sunday, the introspection day. Some community events coming. Don't forget, Stream Deck Lab is at 1:30 p.m. David Paskin takes us on an exploration of the Stream Deck devices. There's a reader workshop also today, 3 p.m. Pacific time. Conversations with Tony Mobley tonight, 4 p.m. is a kind of behind the scenes look, and then 5 o'clock the show. Thursday, Isadora with Ella's coming back. Birding with Lois also happens on Thursday. On Friday, it's Friday Tech Tackle. So Tom Ferguson, you can join him on that. And that is all except for thank you to all of the panelists who are here today. I could not have managed to get through this without all of these fabulous experts on the panel. We also want to thank the producers, those of you who wrote and submitted questions, and the staff in the back end who are going to be on the credits you're about to watch and who, without whom we could not make any of this happen. Please pay attention to who's there. And thank you all for watching. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Get to whisper now.
Yeah, that was a lot of credits. I kept thinking, I got a big list of credits I can always stretch because we'll be really short today. And then we ran over.
It's not exactly my idea of a short show.
That was not what I expected when I looked up 10 minutes into the show and I saw we had 4 questions.
Lots of good interest, lots of good answers too.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.